Welcome to Business Beyond Borders, the go-to podcast for CPA firms seeking transformative insights. I'm your host, Lawrence Whittam, and with each episode we'll uncover key insights, best practices, and invaluable resources tailored for CPAs. From trending strategies to diving deep into outsourcing and offshoring, our experts will help in all areas of your business. Hey everybody, and welcome back to Business Beyond Borders. So I'm here today with Wesley Hartman, who's joined me. So thank you for joining, Wes.
Happy to be here.
And Wesley started Automata Practice Development recently, and again we had a couple of conversations over the last month, and it's quite interesting because it's more on the automating, what practices should be looking at when it comes to automating and looking at the different softwares that you're using. And it's very interesting because when I talk to a lot of the software teams and stuff in the profession, they tend to not have or have worked in a CPA firm, right? It's from an outside perspective coming in, right? Which means that they don't always quite understand what the firm is going through in a lot of cases, whereas Wesley had a very different experience and has worked inside a firm for a number of years and was really helping them quite hands-on with this and really connecting the dots between a lot of the different softwares that don't necessarily communicate well together or communicate at all with each other, right? And creating bots to do so. I know you were part of the AICPA, one of the committees there as well, helping with the tech and the automation perspective as well. So has really had a big focus in the CPA world for quite a number of years already. So it's very cool to meet you, Wesley. And yeah, I'll let you give a bit of a background, bit of an intro about yourself now, if you don't mind, and share a little bit about what your mission is and what you're really trying to help firms do.
Yeah, thank you. So my background is I actually have a degree in computer engineering. So back in college, me and a bunch of student engineers, we built an autonomous vehicle. It drove itself. It was about the size of a golf cart, so not a full car, but it had sensors, it had decision making, as well as motors and wheels and all that stuff. And we took it to competition. So automation's kind of been my background before I even hit the accounting space. But then after I graduated, I ended up in information technology and I worked for a firm for 15 years, right? So I've been through 15 tax seasons. That firm also did audit, A&A work, as well as cash advisory work, that sort of thing, from daily, weekly bookkeeping and whatnot, all the way up to, those big audits like 401k audits or nonprofit audits, things like that, and everything in between. But, while I was there, I was director of technology, aside from making sure the printers were working when we had printers, fully paperless now. But one of the things I did was I very much flexed my engineering skills and mindset into building automations for the firm, trying to automate processes so we could do more with less, that sort of thing. And then starting last December, so December 2023, I started up my business where I kind of am bringing that same skill set to a broader accounting firm audience, essentially. So what I do now is I work with firms. I try to understand their processes, what makes them unique, but I come in with that experience of having been a technology, a tech person in an accounting space. So when I throw out form numbers, I understand what forms I'm actually talking about and that sort of thing.
Now, what actually got you into the accounting firm, right? Just from the get-go, because based on the firm, again, I've obviously looked over your profile and we had a conversation about the firm you were working with before. And again, it was smaller to mid-sized firm, right? In a sense, like 50, 60 people or so that's a smaller firm, right? To a big capacity. So what made them somewhat bring the investment into you? Was it just more of they were bringing you on as more of that internal IT person initially, and that was sort of the big mindset, and then you sort of developed it towards more of like developing the automations and the bots and things? Or was it they were really looking for that piece as well? Because if it was in that end, I see very few firms sort of developing on the smaller side, looking at that full-time person like that. So what did that look like?
So it definitely started as a traditional IT role. Again, fixing servers. They had servers in their physical location. A local exchange server for email, all that other. What now is kind of old tech in many ways. And they were trying to implement their paperless office, which I had experience in. They were still full paper and stuff like that. So they were bringing me in initially as that tech role, but more from an IT perspective. But they did want to be a bit more tech forward. The managing partner at the firm at the time, was very bullish on DOS when it was coming out, right? And he was building batch files and things like that. He, but became managing partner. He had to focus on other things, over time. And I'm talking, we're talking late 80s, early 90s with that. But they've always liked the idea of being bullish on technology. But they kind of they stopped for a little bit, and then when I came in, I kind of reinvigorated that piece of it with my different. I did have a different perspective, coming in. With honestly, I didn't have a background in accounting except for my father-in-law being an accountant. So, but when I came into the firm, they were teaching me the accounting idea. This was, again, 15 years ago, but I was bringing in that, like, all right, let's see where we can apply engineering mindset to the technology side of the business.
Cool. And now, so obviously you're not coming in and your background in terms of you're building a robot that's fully automated, that's driving around. So hopefully you managed to sell that to Tesla or something, and that's where that developed. We'll see. But maybe I don't think you'd be doing what you were doing if that was the case. But what should a firm be thinking about, right? From a small firm to maybe a bigger firm, like what should they even be like considering when it comes to this automation piece? Like, what is the technology they should be looking at? Which is the ideal software packages that they already have that you can be like, listen, easy bots here, and I say easy, but like this is obtainable for you, right?
Yeah.
Rather than you don't need to go out of the world and go and pay for huge consultants and stuff like this, right? What should they be thinking about?
So I think the first thing is looking at your current existing tech stack. Anytime, if you're looking at new technology, new software, let's say you want to replace your practice management software, right? Aside from the normal UI usability and it has features that you're looking for, one of the first questions you should be asking is, does this software have APIs? Because APIs are the best way to automate. They're not the only way, but they're like the first line of, okay, let's look at the APIs. And if it's, let's say, for example, we want to, when someone fills out a web form on our website, we want to automatically enter that into our CRM system, right? As opposed to having a person sit there, get that email, and then go and type it in. Let's automate that piece. Best way to do that is if you have APIs on both ends, on your web form side and then your CRM side, because then APIs are what people like programmers can use to make those automated connections from point A to point B, where the data just flows through without a person intervening. Now, as far as ways to create those connections, there's a couple different ways. There are, from what people like me who are like full-blown software developers, engineers, again, experienced in the accounting space, but you can also use low-code, no-code tools such as Zapier or Make, where you can connect. That's how those tools work, is they create those connections to those APIs for you automatic. A lot of times they have them pre-built. So like, let's say, for example, if you use Google Forms, you can have Google Forms in Zapier, when a new form gets submitted, automatically send that data over to whatever system you want. So those are kind of pre-built low-code, no-code systems. So those are kind of the spectrum, I think, from full software developers like me to low-code, no-code, where even I use Zapier every once in a while because it makes sense, right? Use the best tool for the job.
Yeah, and if it's already there, if it's built already, right, there's no reason to reinvent the wheel in a lot of cases, right? So when it's there, use it, right? Yep. And it's probably more cost effective at that point as well compared to spending the time on it, right, in a lot of cases. Absolutely. So what do you see as the biggest opportunity for firms? Is it on the more technical side when it comes to, like, let's say, the tax process, right? And looking at between the tax softwares they're using in a certain suite? or is it between more of the practice management, right, side of the business and automating those types of things? Like, where should a firm start if they haven't started anywhere right now? Like, what's the easiest thing for them to start on?
I usually like to tell people to look at more on the operations side of things, right? So if a client's emailing about a complicated tax matter, that's an automation is not really going to be able to answer that. That needs a human touch. But a great example, and we've done numerous implementations of this, when a tax return is signed, usually using a digital platform, like either a DocuSign, right, signature, or SafeSend, someone has to sit there and download that signed PDF and upload it into the document manager, right? So if you're a firm that's doing 4,000 returns, that's 4,000 download uploads that have to happen. And if we just look at return on investment for that sort of thing, even if it takes, I'm going to say 5 minutes per download and upload. A lot of people think well, it takes faster than that, but the reality is, when doing a task, you get distracted, other things happen. So I'm just thinking 5 minutes is an average, right? So if we take it 5 minutes times 4,000, right? So that's, I'm going to do a little math, right? 20,000 minutes, right? But if you then divide that by how many minutes how many working hours there are in a year, there's 2,000 essentially. So just, I don't have the math immediately available, but you can see 20,000 minutes that could be automated, where that 20,000 minutes of person time can be used to do tasks that are better suited for a person, like going after clients to send us their documents and things like that, right? Those are kind of more human touch, right? The chasing. But automatically moving a document in 8879, which also is kind of an afterthought. I mean, I've talked to a number of firms, and the 8879, having that available is usually not what, and like when an IRS audit happens, they're looking at deductions. They're looking at other things. They're not going to be like, well, did you get the 8879 signed and in your document manager? It's not something that comes up usually, right? But the accountant has to have that file. So let's automate it. There's no reason a person needs to do that task. So that's usually like one instant low hanging fruit we've talked about. Others like sales pipeline automation, that web form, fill out that web form, get into the CRM automatically, so a person isn't sitting there and manually typing in name, address, telephone number of a person, that sort of thing.
And then what about from the best capability of it, right? So then when we get to more technical, like where can it realistically get to, right? Is it, again, between, let's say, the CCH software packages, right, the Thomson Router suite of services, like how much can you automate realistically, right? And what can that goal be for a firm to look at, right?
Yeah, so this is kind of, we talk the two big companies. We'll throw Intuit into that mix too, because let's get all three, the trifecta of the big ones, right? So there is a number of automations that can be done in their systems. And you definitely want like API connectivity to do those, right? So Thomson, so first of all, APIs usually focus on web-based applications, right? So Thomson's Go System and CCH Access, right? Those you can import, export data directly out of using their APIs, which means, okay, if you can get that data in some other automated fashion, for example, you're using maybe a product like Tally4, where you're using that to do your trial balance and and then you can then use API connections to suck that data directly into the tax return, so that a person isn't sitting there and basically repunching in information from one system to another. Those are the types of automations that can be available in some of the big firms. It's a little harder when you're using like those online, the cloud products. It's a little harder when you get into like CCH Pro Systems and Thomson's UltraTax, because those are locally installed products. So those you're looking at using what are called RPA bots, where it takes control of your keyboard and mouse and does the work for you, right? It types that stuff in. The one thing I always want to caution though is that like when making that change from one, especially tax software, to another, or any software, is you always got to take into account the cost of that change from a usability perspective, right? If it's like, great, yeah, we get some integration, but everyone's having to spend, 10x more time doing the work, and there's really no end goal where like, okay, we can reduce that 10x time back to 1x time because people now are used to the software, then that's always one thing to be cautious about when switching. So just throwing that out there when you're picking new software.
I guess what's the first step? I mean, I would assume the first step to this is really, again, assessing the processes that could be improved, right? And looking at and just conversations internally to figure out this is the most time consuming process. Is there a way to do this? But then essentially creating a big workflow document and an image essentially to show, okay, here are all the individual steps, right?
Yeah.
Maybe there's only certain elements in there that can be automated and certain elements that can't be. Right. I mean, would that be the sort of initial step that you would help with to even identify where those gaps were? Or?
Yeah. So ideally, they'll have a standard operating procedure document that can be referenced, right?
Yeah.
Because then you just look at that. However, a lot of firms I talk to don't necessarily have that because it turns into, well, how did you learn to do this thing? Well, the person who worked here 5 years ago showed me how to do it, right? And that's not a good way to pass on knowledge. It was very interesting. Just aside, someone I talked to, a CPA who was ex-military, said that they had the standard operating procedure everything because someone who comes in like a sergeant who's coming in to do one job is only going to be at that job for a couple of years, and then they get promoted, they get transferred somewhere else. A new sergeant's coming in to do that same job, or corporal or private or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So like that documentation has to be in place because you basically turnovers built in to the jobs. So along those lines, if you can have a standard operating procedure, even if your staff have been with you for like 10, 15 years, that's ideal. However, not everyone has that. On my website, one thing I give out for free is there is what I call an automation impact spreadsheet. And what I tell people is it's just a simple spreadsheet. It has the task, a description of the task, very basic. And then it has scores that you can give each part of the process, right? Like how many steps are involved, how complex are the steps, how long does it actually take? Is it a fast task that takes 10 seconds or does it take 5 minutes? Things like that. And then I also have what I call the annoyance factor, which is how much do people actually hate doing this task, but they do it because they have to, right? Like no one's excited to download an 8879. So I usually give that out to people and I say, hey, have this on your network, share it with everybody, and explain to everybody when you are going throughout your day, your week, your month, if you find a task that you find is repetitive, you're doing it a lot, it's not really adding value to the firm, to the client, you're like, why am I doing this, so to speak, right? Open up that spreadsheet, document it, score it, and then close the spreadsheet, right? So it's just like fast, boom, boom, boom. It should take you, 5 minutes. I'll say 10 because, right, even I'm going back to my own, like, it should take less time, right? Yeah. But document that, and then by the time you're done with like busy season right now, if there are tax people that are listening to this right now and it's the middle of busy season, get that sheet, have all your staff start filling it out. You'll probably find like 10 to 15 automation opportunities within your firm, and then the ranking lets you decide, okay, which ones are going to be the most impactful. So that's what I would recommend.
And it's funny because again, this is the sort of busier times are the times when you should be looking and thinking and identifying these types of opportunities that you can look at to make efficiency improvements, right? And again, I do it a lot with the outsourcing, and I think it's quite hard to implement for some, right, in a lot of cases, or really understand that how important it is to just do it as you're doing, right? In terms of, okay, you're doing a process, record yourself, there you go. You've got essentially documentation of how that process works, right? You're doing work right now. Like you've got a lot of tax returns on your plate. If you don't do it now and if you don't test now, right, it means that, again, you now have to spend more time in the off seasons or more time redoing what you just did in order to then create that stuff. So it's actually less efficient in the long run in a lot of cases to do it. So no, I agree. When it comes to even the outsourcing, I try to advise exactly the same thing. Like, it's busy, but just put this in, right? I mean, start doing this now, start thinking about it, because it's also present, right? You feel you're doing it, you're like, yeah, this is an annoying activity that I'm doing, let's at least document it so that we can now in the off season, we can then go and address it at least, and we're not going to forget about it. Right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So
and I think
it's funny.
Yeah. And it's interesting because the pain, I can't tell you how many times where the pain feels really bad during the busy time, but then once after, and they have like a couple weeks, they go on vacation, they come back, and they forget about the pain. They're like, oh, it wasn't that bad, right? You think back, and then you go through the cycle again, and it's twice a year, right? You get your March 15th, April 15th, and then September, October, and every time it's in March, April, there's pain, and then the pain goes away for a bit, and then you feel it again in September, October, and then it goes away. And then instead of making like, all right, and a lot of times it turns into, well, next year will be different, right? Next year will be better. And it's like, no. And it's interesting because those conversations. Yeah. It's like brand new concept. But, and then, it's interesting because, we talked a little bit about offshoring. Like in many ways, automation is, on outsourcing. Talking about outsourcing, it's two sides of the same coin. But I always like to tell people also that like when you're using outsourced staff, they shouldn't be doing this work either. If a computer can do it, then have a computer do the work. Primarily also because you can also look at automations. They run 24/7, middle of the night, doesn't matter. We have a number of automations that run in 2 a.m. because what they do is they look at what happened in the prior day. And then it does all the work, like downloading engagement letters from an engagement letter like Practice Ignition. We download all those because no one really wants to do it, but you got to kind of have to have those signed documents in your document manager. So instead of like, all right, giving it to an admin person or outsourcing it because maybe they cost less than onshore staff, right? Like the reality is though, is the people that you're outsourcing to, they're professionals too, right? A lot of I've talked to outsourcers, they're CPAs, like they've passed the CPA exam. Have them do work that a CPA would do, and have the computers do the work that computers can do. I also like to tell people like how many accountants, at least on the tax side, go to the IRS website and manually download forms and fill them out. No, we have computers, whether it's Lacert, ProSystem, CCH, Thomson Reuters, those computers do the calculations for us. We have the technology to do it for us. So let's just expand that.
Yeah, and it's so one of the things you mentioned before as well is around even some of this technology has been around for so long, but hasn't been necessarily like brought into the accounting profession in a lot of cases. Like as simple as you mentioned about essentially just something that's moving the keyboard, like typing on the keyboard, like it moves the mouse. And I don't know the exact term for it, but I used it when I was a kid. I used it, like, I remember in video games that I was playing like on the computer, and like there were tedious tasks on like RPG type games and stuff. And I would literally use one of those and it would go through and it would click for me. And then I could leave the house and then it is done 5 hours of this game for me. You know what I mean? And that was when I was a kid. But it was very, very simple to use even back then. And that was like 15, 20 years ago that I was using maybe something like that. But I don't see firms like, again, you could essentially keep your systems. And again, you don't have to anymore, but because we're on servers and virtual machines and stuff, but they could realistically have just set up a system and then have it going on the side and doing these certain processes as well. So it's pretty interesting to now pulling that to this. I wouldn't have even thought about it or considered that. So,
yep. Yeah. There's many times where I'm running. So like robotic process automation is the term, right? Where if I have buddies who played, WoW and all that stuff, and they're using a software called Auto Hotkey, which is exactly that. It's, press a couple, wait maybe a couple seconds, press a couple more keys, stuff like that. I mean, I even went low tech. There was a game I was playing, I don't remember, but basically, a buddy of mine, he was playing Gran Turismo 4. This was back in college, and to do some of the endurance races, he'd rubber band the analog stick to keep it in place, and that's a kind of a form of automation. Then he'd go to class and come back, and then it'd be done, right? And so kind of that ingenuity of like, hey, let's look at what other technology options are out there and then utilizing them. So I would, kind of along those lines, when I would run automations at my old firm, I would have a virtual machine. I'd load that up. We were using Pro Systems, so we had to use RPA where it takes control of the keyboard and mouse. But I'd load a virtual machine. I'd run the bot on the virtual machine, and then I would actually do work on my regular machine, right? So it's funny. I was basically multitasking the working on two clients at the same exact time, that sort of thing. And I was still billing for the client for the RPA work as well as billing for the work that I was doing, that sort of thing. What actually gets invoiced is up to the partner, but I'm showing that like, hey, we are doubling value essentially by having a computer do the work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's crazy. And now, so how do you typically work with firms? Like what size firms are you normally working with now, right? Are you looking to work with more so? And I guess like, what are those options that they have to engage with somebody like yourself when it comes to this?
Yeah. So Automata itself is what we call ourselves is a managed automation service provider, right? So what we do is we will build, we maintain, and we manage the automations that a firm that engages us to work on, that sort of thing. We work with the firm. So what we try to do is we try to have an impact without being disruptive. So we'll look at your existing procedures, and ideally we'll automate things so that we just tell the staff, you don't have to do that thing anymore. The machine is now going to do it, and those staff can work on other tasks. As far as firms, we have clients that are 4 to 5 staff. Like it's one of our clients is 2 partners and like 5 overseas staff, and they're growing. But our largest firm is an 80 person accounting firm that has does a lot of tax returns, that sort of thing. So generally speaking, what I would say is we tend to work mostly with 100 users and under firms. And that's only because we tend to find that anything larger, they'll actually have some of their own developers in-house, right? And they're kind of working on some of their stuff. So maybe I'll do a little bit of consulting with them. But for the most part, we focus on that managed service provider of like 100 users or less approximately. But one of the things that lets us work quickly is that so we are developers. So we work in a programming language called Python. And in that Python language, we build out connections to all these different applications. So if a firm comes to me and says, well, we use, let's say, SafeSend returns for signing our returns, and we use CCH document for our document manager. Well, we've done that project multiple times. We have the code that already builds that. So we can rapidly get those deployed without having to do a bunch of additional R&D that a new developer would have to do, right? So that's
so the implementation is actually pretty quick to some extent. Obviously, you've got to put it in, you've got to develop it into their systems and everything. However, you've got a lot of the code already written and a lot of the bots already built, where at least in the accounting field, right?
Yeah. So for example, I'm using the SafeSend to a CCH document as an example, but because we all had the code built, once we get there's a few details like, okay, what do you use for your class and subclass in CCH, right? For the document categories. But once we get some of those details, we've done a deployment in like a week and a half kind of thing. So, but yeah. And then something else that
almost immediate gratification from getting it as well, right? So they can really see it. And now, how quickly can you show the results up front in terms of saying like, okay, by deploying this is roughly what we address as the amount of time you're going to save, right? Or are you able to see that quite up front, or is it more of a testing process as to getting those key determined amounts?
It depends on the process that's being automated. So for ones that we've seen a lot of, for example, downloading documents from one system to another, usually we can pretty accurately calculate a return on investment, right? Because it's like, okay, we know it's going to be about 5 minutes, but we've automated what we call like the sales pipeline, right? Person fills out a form, automated link goes out, Calendly gets scheduled. When that Calendly gets scheduled, what happens in the CRM? That tends to vary a little bit. So it's a little harder to calculate return on investment, but we say like, well, what part of that process is manual, and we say, okay, how long does that take approximately? And then we say, okay, if we take that out completely, what's it look like? Especially with prospects, that's usually a good area to automate, because one of the reasons is that with the prospect, you're not going to get every prospect, right? Like that's just the reality of sales. Any prospect that you lose, essentially, I call it's lost time, right? Because if you gain the client, all right, you're kind of getting the revenue from that client. If you don't get that client, then all the time that was spent there, you've basically gained nothing, except maybe some knowledge on maybe how better to sell, that sort of thing. So that's what we do. And then there's actually one other thing, I just remembered that we're also trying to do. So in addition to our managed automation services, we are actually working on expanding our service offerings. So when we automate a process, from A to Z, maybe we identify step Q in that process as something that a lot of firms have struggled with, right? Whether they are small firms, large firms, things like that. So we're working on what we call mini automations. And these mini automations, the first one we're looking to release right after October 15th is generates an Excel checklist based on the PDF tax organizer. And it's just wages, like what are your W-2s, the 1099s, the bank statement, like that sort of thing. It's just a simple list, because there are times where you want that nice fancy portal. But then there's other times where we're just like, can we just have a list of what we need to provide? So we've identified with some of our clients where we automated like some of the organizer process. We looked and we're like, okay, we can take the part where we create a data set of all the documents that all that all clients need to be requested, and spit that out into a spreadsheet. And then from there, the accounting firm takes that where they want to go. So besides our managed service provider, we're looking to build out our mini automations. And then we actually are also working on an assessment where we will deep dive into their standard operating procedures, do some interviews, kind of think of it as an assessment of, okay, where are you at as far as automation opportunities, versus that spreadsheet is more like a self-assessment. We can come in and do an assessment as well.
Understood. No, very cool, Wesley. So, and again, really appreciate the time that you spent today. Where's the best place people can find you? And again, we're happy to post like the link to that free file and everything that you'd mentioned. But where's the best place for people to reach you at?
So best thing is you can follow me on LinkedIn, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm attached to social media in that regard. You can also just email me at whartman@automatapracdev.com. Go to my website. We can schedule discovery calls for that initial conversation where we look at some of your firm and just have a conversation. So those are probably the three best ways, email, LinkedIn, just send me a DM, follow me, send me a DM, or you can even just go to my website and just schedule a block of time on my calendar for us to chat.
Okay, cool. No, very, very helpful, Wes. And I will we'll post all those links when this gets released so that everybody can go onto it. And again, I mean, this is just an area, everybody, that you should be looking at, right? Have the conversation, right? Because again, when we talk about, and the reason for this conversation is that when we're talking about outsourcing and offshoring and all these elements, that there are a lot of elements that people don't need to be as involved as they are right now, right? So it's worthwhile getting somebody that can come in and have a look for you, because in the long run, it'll be a lot more cost effective to automate certain aspects compared to hiring somebody else, even at a lesser cost, right? Because at the end of the day, that cost's going to go up, right? Because people are then going to stay with you and so forth. So, and it needs to be, if we're talking about the staffing problem in the profession, is there isn't just one solution, right? It's got to be a multi-pronged attack essentially in different areas, right? Whereas we're changing things in the firm, we're changing the way we're working, right? But we're looking at automation as well as looking at different staffing models. So again, really appreciate it, Wesley, and everybody reach out to Wesley if you need any help. when it comes to any type of automation or development, or if you want to just have a chat about technology, I'm sure somebody else on here listening has also played one of the games where they've used something. So it's funny to hear about those things. And appreciate everybody joining for this episode of Business Beyond Borders. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to Business Beyond Borders. I'm Lawrence Whittam, and it's been a pleasure bringing you impactful insights tailored for the modern CPA firm. Remember, the world of accounting is vast and ever evolving, and we're here to navigate it together. For more resources and episodes, don't forget to subscribe and reach out to our experts. Until next time, keep pushing the boundaries of your business and explore the limitless possibilities beyond borders.